You would think that it's crazy to say Trump's tariffs were good for Canada, right? He called us a national security threat, slapped 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium, crushed our auto exports, and even floated the idea of turning Canada into 51st US state. Most Canadians saw it as a chaos. But what if I say it was exactly what we needed? Because for decades we were too comfortable, relying on one customer for nearly 80% of our exports, running an oil industry that shipped 4 million barrels a day to US, with almost no serious infrastructure to send it anywhere else. We have just one operational submarine, half of our navy almost grounded, our air force needs a complete overhaul, and our Arctic wide open to Russian or Chinese expansion. Till 6 months ago, we were just spending 1.35% of GDP on our defense, far below NATO targets, because we knew that the US would back us up. And while the world changed, Canada's worker productivity flatlined, no serious growth in over 15 years. And there was no real urgency to fix it until Trump happened. This video isn't about praising Trump. It's about how his pressure triggered the most important Canadian transformation in decades. So let's get started. It started in early 2025. Trump, back in White Office, reimposed harsh tariffs on Canadian aluminium and steel. Auto parts were next, and even lumber was not spared. But then exports fell off a cliff. The Bank of Canada immediately warned GDP growth will be substantially weaker this quarter. And they're right. By May, the merger and acquisition activity in Canada dropped over 40% year over year, which means the investor confidence has collapsed. And suddenly Canada realized we had no plan B, because Canada had built its economy around one golden rule: keep America happy and everything stays stable. But Trump didn't play by the old rules. He tore up the script, and with it our assumptions. And that shock became the beginning of our national reckoning. So how Canada got so dependent? To understand why Trump's tariffs hit so hard, you need to understand how we ended up so exposed. It started with convenience. Back in 1988, Canada signed a historic free trade deal with US. The tariffs almost vanished, the borders was wide open, and trade exploded. And slowly, Canada stopped thinking strategically. Why diversify when US was the biggest, richest customer next door? And by 2025, almost 76 to 80% of our Canadian exports went to just one country, the US. So if we look at it, we aren't just traded with the US, we are hooked on it. Even our oil industry, over 4 million barrels per day, mostly heading south. And despite the pipelines like Trans Mountain finally completing, there was almost still no infrastructure to send that oil anywhere else. And moreover, our supply chains are also built for only one direction, which is south. And we have ignored all these signs for years. And there are some other issues too. Internal trade barriers between the provinces have made it easier to ship to US or Europe than to ship it to Quebec. And then there's Bill C-69, the legislation that made large infrastructure projects, especially energy pipelines, nearly impossible. It slowed everything down, drove up construction costs, and made investors hesitate. The construction sector, one of Canada's most important industries, is also now vulnerable. Already struggling with low productivity, rising labor cost, and endless permit delays, and a government competing for the same skilled trades to build public housing. It is like building a house on cracked foundation. And with Trump's tariffs, we are exposed at every crack, all at once. And now, talking about defense, trade wasn't the only thing we outsourced. We also outsourced our safety. After World War II, Canada co-founded NATO in 1949, and then NORAD with the US in 1958, a joint defense agreement that essentially said, you guard the world and we'll watch the radar. And for decades, that was the deal. We cut defense budgets, bought time with diplomacy, and then we used all the savings we had in the defense sector to fund healthcare, pensions, and social programs. And coming to 2024, we were just spending 1.35% of our GDP on defense, well below NATO's 2% target. And here's what it looks like now. Only one of our 4 submarines is operational. Half of our Navy isn't ready for deployment. And the Air Force is still flying CF-18s, originally built in 1980s. And the Arctic, where now global superpowers are wanting control, is now wide open. And we weren't just under-equipped, we are vulnerable. We had no credible way to defend our northern frontier from Russian expansion or Chinese surveillance. When Trump demanded NATO allies pay their fair share, Canada is looking like very fairly exposed. And then came the shift. In June 2025, under immense pressure, Prime Minister Mark Carney stood with NATO leaders and made a bold promise. Canada would increase defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035, starting with a $150 billion annual commitment. The largest defense investment since World War II. Wasn't just about jets and ships. Defense spending is economic transformation. It funds research and development in aerospace, robotics, and cybersecurity. It will build tech clusters, it will train skilled trades at scale, and fuels entire supply chains from mining to manufacturing. In other words, defending Canada could build a new Canada. And now, the turning point. For decades, Canada just coasted. We were a quiet neighbor, comfortable, safe, and dependent. And then Mr. Trump came back and forced us to wake up. By mid-2025, the tariffs are going to be biting hard, with GDP growth weakening and public confidence really shaken. But instead of crumbling, something unexpected is now starting to happen. Canada is starting to move fast. The One Canada Act also started to tear down interprovincial trade walls. And on the infrastructure side, dormant mega projects are suddenly fast-tracked. And on the energy side, plans for Arctic shipping lanes, new pipelines, and battery mineral development were greenlit. Even industries long tangled in red tape like construction are now being shaken up. Skilled trades mobility, once blocked by provincial licensing, is finally being harmonized. And for the first time in years, Canada wasn't just reacting to US, we are building ourselves. For over a century, Canada built its infrastructure east to west to stitch together the provinces. But when it came to trade, we funneled everything south. As of now, 75% of our exports are going to US, and 90% of our oil, about 4 million barrels a day, is flowing south. And the pipelines or ports that could have opened global routes, they were either stalled, blocked, or never built. So Trump's tariff didn't just cost us money, they also exposed the weak spine of our economy. So now we are rebuilding that spine. The Western Arctic Corridor, the multimodal route linking Alberta's oil, grain, critical minerals to Hudson Bay, and even the Arctic. This opens a new trade lanes to Europe and Asia, bypassing US bottlenecks. Northern Ontario's Ring of Fire, rich in lithium, nickel, and cobalt, is now considered the future of EVs. Now paired with domestic refining, these minerals will be processed in Canada and not China. And the last one is small modular reactors, SMRs. They are currently deployed in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Ontario. These next generation nuclear units will power clean growth and position Canada as energy tech exporter. And all of this requires upgraded ports from Halifax to Vancouver, even new hubs like Churchill and Grace Bay in the Arctic. For the first time in modern history, Canada is not just trading with one neighbor. We are looking into trading with the entire world. And every project we build is a step away from dependency and a step towards sovereignty. So now, let's talk about how it hits home literally. Because Canada's productivity have barely moved in 15 years. Our GDP per hour worked is now 20% below US average, and in construction it's even worse because productivity have been flat since 1990s, which means our hourly rate for every hour worked in construction have not improved. That matters because a nation that cannot build efficiently can house itself affordably. Projects will be delayed, skilled laborers are going to be in short supply, and development costs will skyrocket. And the red tape, like what we saw in the Bill C-69, will stall pipelines and infrastructure. But this transformation is going to force a reset. New trade corridors and military manufacturing demand more housing near the ports, bases, and factories. Provinces are breaking down interprovincial labor rules and letting tradesmen like plumbers, electricians, and other tradespeople move in where the jobs are. So if we consider in the short term, it's going to be a pain. Wages are going to rise, costs will spike, and materials will get squeezed. But looking further in the long term, the productivity is going to rise, builders will scale faster, and the housing supply finally starts catching up with the demand. Because if we are serious about sovereignty, we need to be serious about how we build, all tied together. This isn't just economic policy, it's real estate, labor, quality of life, all tied together. So now, looking at all of it, where all of this leads Canada moving forward, let's for say fast 25 years, 2050, we can potentially have Arctic ports shipping liquefied natural gas and minerals to Asia and Europe, no more relying on US pipelines or railroads. We trade on our own terms with our own allies. Our military, self-reliant, modern, and tech-driven. We are not defending just the north, we are potentially exporting AI-powered defense systems and clean military tech. Our builders and tradesmen will work across the provinces freely, permits coming faster, construction faster, cost finally coming down because we have rebuilt how the system works, and our productivity on the grand scheme of things have increased. Our clean energy exports rivals our oil, hydrogen, wind, or even SMRs. Both power our economy and our international credibility. Trade dependence to US potentially down to less than 50%, not because we stopped trading with them, but because we finally started trading with everyone else. And productivity definitely going to be up because defense R&D and interprovincial reform and infrastructure spending force us to be better, not bigger, but smarter. This isn't just utopia. It's what happens when a crisis forces a country to grow up. Looking at it, I think Donald Trump didn't set out to make Canada stronger. Caring about Canada's sovereignty is probably the last things that he cares. His tariffs were meant to punish, to provoke, and to remind the world who's the boss. But here's what it happened instead. He exposed our weaknesses. He shattered the illusion that we can rely on the US forever and stopped sleepwalking through globalization and started showing up. So sometimes it takes a crisis to shake a country's awake. And this might just be the moment Canada stopped being quiet and comfortable and started becoming powerful and intentional. Subscribe for more videos like this. See you in the next video.